And we are live, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the Rational Standard. I am Martin van Staden, and I am joined by Zakhele Mthembu and David Ansara. Kind of the usual core crowd of our August weekly show. This week again has been quite crazy, but interesting enough, and maybe this is a good thing for kind of national attention span. There's been mainly one story, and by now all of you will kind of be familiar with it. It's dominated headlines. It's still dominating headlines, basically. Well, what's it now? 5, 6 days after the event. But as you probably know by now, on Sunday, last Sunday, Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi, I know we use military ranks for our police officers. I'm going to try as far as I can to not do that. I think there's a significant level of cringe involved in what Becky Tele tried to pull off there. So he is the provincial commissioner of the police service in KwaZulu-Natal. A pretty interesting guy. I've heard great things. I've seen great things from him fighting crime in that province. I've also seen some less than great things. He's pro gun control and so on, so that's a problem. But there have been corruption allegations against him in the past. I think it would be tough for you to be a civil servant in this country without having at least some checkered record. But on the whole, it seems like this guy is sensible. And he seems to also have earned his stripes in the special task force, kind of worked up the ranks. So he does seem to be someone with a high level of competence, which is somewhat rare. I don't want to add to the cult of personality that's developing around the man, but yeah, I think he's probably a somewhat credible voice, and he effectively came out and said, "Listen, the anti-political killings task force that was established has been abolished by the police minister, Senzo Mchunu, um, and by other senior SAPS officials from national level when this unit has just become quite effective. It's led to successful prosecutions. Various dockets are waiting for prosecution with senior police officials and the NPA. And now, out of the blue, just as this unit has revealed certain things, just as that happens, suddenly the police minister instructs the national police commissioner to abolish this unit because, well, the minister says he doesn't see what the point is. It's kind of served its purpose. And Mkhwanazi wasn't having any of that, and he basically revealed quite a few interesting things. I think most of you are familiar with a lot of this now, but I think the kind of headline items are that there's SMSs going around of a guy called Brown Moti, who is apparently kind of a fixer type character for a lot of corrupt dealings. And he sent an SMS to a guy called Kat Matlala, a businessman who is kind of involved in tender corruption, allegedly, of course. And in this case, specifically, police contracts, police tenders. And he was arrested at some point, this Kat Matlala guy, a few months or years ago, by this political killings task force, apparently. And this Mokotsi guy, after or at the time that this unit was being abolished, basically kind of sent an SMS and said, "Hey, yeah, that unit that arrested you, it's being dissolved. So no worries. The docket is ending up with some other senior guy in the police force, a deputy national commissioner for crime detection, Shadrach Sibaya." So nothing to worry about. And of course, it was abolished. The task force was abolished, and then Guanazi revealed these things, and the police minister said that he's never heard of this guy, this Brown Mokotsi. And then a few days later, he said, "Oh, no, 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 you misunderstood me. No, no, he's a comrade." uh, so he said before Parliament, he never heard of the man. Then suddenly, I think within 2 months after that, he said, "No, he's a comrade." Um, uh, so yeah, I mean, that's, and of course Parliament is damn squib. National Assembly Speaker Toko Didiza has tasked 3 committees with investigating the allegations. I said on X that if I'm ever suspected of crime, I would also very much like a parliamentary committee to please investigate me, or a national commission of inquiry, or even an FMF integrity commission to do the heavy lifting. But of course, the idea of the police doing an investigation and there being a trial, no, I mean, perish the thought. David, interesting times in our criminal justice space, or maybe the lack of a criminal justice space. What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, gee, it's quite a lot of drama, and it all, even the names of the characters, like Kat Matlala, and it sounds like something out of a mob film. And I think I must confess to being a little bit out of my depth on this particular topic, because I've been rather busy this week and haven't really delved into all of the details. But I do think that there are some interesting developments there in terms of a schism as well between the executive, which nominally controls the coercive power of the state, and also that coercive apparatus itself, and tensions between the police senior top brass and the police minister as well. So it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out. And I think, just as a kind of a general macro observation in South Africa, I think something that really characterizes our politics is that it's kind of like a Potemkin village. And, you can't breathe without hearing about some reference to the government. So whether it's interventions in the labor market, or some industrial policy, or some employment creation scheme, the YES program, or the expanded public works program, there's social grants, there's all of this stuff, family meetings by the president. The state is ubiquitous in South Africa. It's meddling in every aspect of your life, but that is an illusion, because the state is actually incredibly weak. And the weaker it gets, the more it tries to project its authority and to try and make it look like it's in control. But actually, the core function of the state, as we've discussed many times on this pod, is the protection of life, liberty, and property. And the government is unable to do that. The libertarian, broader, classical liberal group often debates about what is the appropriate role of the state. As Zakes mentioned on his weekly video on the FMF channel this week, some of the anarchists don't believe that the state should have any coercive capabilities at all. But sort of regardless of where you fit in that spectrum, most people would say, okay, well, like, the basic foundational duty of the state is to uphold security and protect the rights of citizens, and administer the legal and judicial system. But, it seems like that apparatus is actually under significant strain and is perhaps breaking down as well. So we have this very strange duality in South Africa, that you have the basic ability of the state to enforce its power is collapsing, and you see that with the runaway crime in the country. But then on the other hand, it's involved in all these myriad other aspects of our day-to-day lives and the economy. And so that's an interesting paradox, I think, and that's the lens with which I'm viewing this particular saga that's playing out in front of our eyes.
Jakes, you did a video that, like David mentioned, maybe you've been following this story a bit closer than
I have.
Either of us have. So please give us your insights.
Yeah, man. Like as David said, it's like a movie. The entire week has just been movie-filled stuff, because, like, every assumption you had about how things generally operate in the background, especially concerning criminal investigation, like, you had a general idea, like, man, like, why are these prosecutions never going through? There must be political interference, of course. And then now to see it, like, like, hey, this actually happens from a high-ranking police officer. So it's pretty great. But to me, the political dynamics of it, right? If, like, the press conference of Officer Mkhwanazi is like, well, was because he named names, which never happens, and was quite startling. And the names he named are names that are connected even to the president himself, right? One man in specific, like Brown Moti or something, the guy who was texting Kat Matlala. And Kat Matlala he, like, grift and patronage networks, it is interesting to see, because Matlala was involved in the Tembisa hospital scandal that, like, if you remember, a lot of ANC people, including, I think, now Premier Lessufi, were implicated in. And then from then on, he got a contract from the police, thanks to Minister Senzo Mkhunu. But most importantly, Brown Moti goes back to the days when he was lobbying, because I was seeing this old article from Times Live whereby he was lobbying for Cyril Ramaphosa to become the president, going as far as saying Cyril Ramaphosa should step down if Jacob Zuma does not endorse his presidency, because it's ANC tradition and culture for deputies to become president. So this Brown Mkhwanazi guy is very well connected, for lack of a better term, right? Connected to the president, in that he was his primary lobbyist to ascend to the ANC presidency. And, like, it seems like this officer has fingered him as being intimately involved in meddling with the administration of justice. I want to see how that will play out, right? Because it is interesting that Minister Mkhunu said that he did not know Brown Mkhwanazi, and then had to come back and, like, oh, no, I know him, because there was an expose later that showed that his daughter, Brown Mkhwanazi's daughter, was elevated, promoted in Senzo Mkhunu's ministry in police, from, like, I think government workers, government employment has different levels, right? So I think she was a level 3 employee and promoted to, I think, a level 4, level 8 post without the proper qualifications for which. I think she's now a spokesperson for the office itself, right? So internally there was a lot of strife happening within his department about him doing something like that to the daughter of Brown Mkhwanazi. So when that was revealed, I think, in the media, then he had to come and do, I guess, damage control, because it was undeniable now that he knows the guy, because he is promoting his daughter within government ranks. Also, another, like, we are seeing different layers of how graft is just ingrained in the South African function, even, like, in the administration of our state, right? Like, it is normal for a minister to be intimately involved in stuffing decisions, so much so that he overrides people who are even his legal advisors, who are like, no, maybe let's not do that. He's like, nope, this girl is, like, my friend's daughter, and as such, she should enjoy a position. But that is another issue. But Minister Mkhunu is implicated in this. And I think, judging from the press conference itself, it should be interesting to see why, because the officer Mkhwanazi said he's conducting a criminal investigation on his side, right? So I guess the police are doing something. So you have to wait and see if the NPA would be able to bring, a case like that to court. But from the press conference, it seems like the police commissioners have, discretion to come and take over dockets, because that's what had happened to him. He said they took over 100 and something dockets from his office, and then the deputy police commissioner, Mr. Sbiya, is the one who pretty much was connected to Brown Mkhwanazi, and I think Matlala, who I guess was the reason Brown Mkhwanazi was interested in saying, hey, this thing will die down, because he's the one who's intimately connected to the two, right? And not to mention this, all of this started because Matlala is currently in prison right now, not for all this graft and corruption. He's in prison for orchestrating a hit on his former girlfriend. And it was due to this former girlfriend saying, hey, this guy is still not being prosecuted, went to the media, because the former girlfriend was an actress on television, on a soapy, on SAPC2. It is literally movie stuff what we are dealing with here. And this guy, Matlala, is currently in prison right now, and all of this is coming out whilst he's still incarcerated, right? So I guess he'll have more charges, hopefully, to contend with if the NPA ever brings them to court. But it seems like, there is this, for lack of a better term, a group of people, right? A mafia, for all the media people. I know our media loves, mafia-style headlines and everything, but there's a group of people who have an ability to influence the highest decision-making bodies, right? Like this even goes back to the Senzo Meyiwa case. If you remember, the advocate who was representing the accused in the Senzo Meyiwa case was arrested. And he was arrested shortly after he mentioned the name of the deputy police commissioner, Mr. Sbiya, and him being involved in, like, the actual tarnishing of the crime scene there. So the the entire implications of this are far-reaching in like how powerful these people are and how they seem to act with no impunity, right? Like the implications of it is that if you ever happen to cross a Brown Moti or a Ket Matlala and they decide to, you know, eliminate you, to kill you, to murder you, as they have done to multiple whistleblowers, all the likes of these characters, right? You will get no justice. There is no prospect of you getting justice because the people who are supposed to administer it are working with the Brown Mkhosis of the world, with the Ket Matlalas of the world, with the Senzo Mkhunus of the world, and can we even say with the presidents of the country, because these are people who support him, right? Which I think would explain why he has been dragging his feet in terms of a response to this huge bombshell of a news, right? He has really said nothing of substance. And that is why we have responses like ad hoc committees, because like if it were to actually be dealt with, it would topple, you know, ministers. It will go to the president, who also has, you know, a controversial thing that was hushed under the carpet by, I don't know, maybe these characters, right? Pala Pala just disappeared and it went poof, even though there's prima facie evidence that he broke laws. He broke laws by having that amount of currency within his possession without any authorization to do so, and nothing was done about it. And then we have to ask ourselves, will anything be done about these revelations that, you know, Officer Mkhwanazi made? I don't know. I don't see the prospects of that being done, right? And then it makes the things like private prosecution and all of these. I've been thinking about all of these things and like, you know, the possibility and how great it is, right? And the foresight of organizations, even though you may disagree with them, just like I do on some things like Afi Forum, right? But the foresight of them to be like, oh man, we need private prosecution because this thing is just kaput. And now we can see that there's nothing there. Criminal justice is compromised, right? Like
Yeah.
now, how can anyone respect the police when they know that with enough money, a docket can disappear, you know, from the deputy police commissioner, right? That is just
No,
wild.
I
So
mean
yeah,
that's what you're bringing up here is key. It's I mean, when Mkhwanazi made these allegations, people were like, I think Ramampara said so. I think Paul O'Sullivan said so. The very kind of the anti-corruption guy. He said that if you say these things, it undermines the people's confidence in the police. And like you can see on X, like liberal capitalists like us, the EFF, MK people, like all across the political spectrum, everyone was like, "What is this confidence in the police thing you're talking about?" Because what you as you were speaking, I was reminded by I mean a few weeks ago, and I think this is probably related somehow, but a guy called Dumisani Kumalo, who was the head of crime intelligence in the SAPS, the head of crime intelligence in the National Police Service, was arrested for fraud and corruption. Right. This is the kind of guy you think is probably responsible for investigating exactly what we're talking about now. It's like, oh, geez, look at this deep conspiracy that goes to the highest echelons of government. Who will we get to investigate this? Well, of course, we must get the head of crime intelligence. That is who we will do it. No, he's in prison. So why is he there? Well, because, and then I think you alluded to this, and this might be a different instance, but he had appointed some friend of the family as payment for something as a brigadier. Again, it's a military rank. Brigadier general is like the lowest ranking general officer in the SAPS, also within crime intelligence. This individual, I think it's a very young woman, had absolutely no experience or record in the police, and yet she became a brigadier. Um, and yeah, I mean, obviously the president is implicated here. This is his faction. This is his faction that is involved here, and I mean that's why I think there are some people who are perhaps overthinking the situation, saying we need to be careful, we need to be quiet, because if we help Mkhwanazi get Mtuno, then Ramaphosa will fall, and then Mashatile will become the president, and kind of a whole thing. And it's like, no, actually, the South African police service is trash, and I know a lot of people will criticize me, even on our side, for saying so. But I've held this view quite consistently for many years now. Is that this is a irredeemable institution, and I think yearly surveying on public confidence and corruption perception in the police in South Africa just confirms this. We don't have this. There's this thing, there's this vibe, right, in that you get around police service in other places around the world. If you hear someone is a cop, and geez, this guy, he heard the call of duty and he's in it to protect his community, and so that doesn't exist in South Africa. I've met police over the years. I've met good cops. You don't get the same institutional culture in our police that you get elsewhere in the world, in countries of successful police. This is a fundamentally untrustworthy institution. In fact, the police are the enemy. I mean, that to me, that's just prima facie obvious that the police service is not. They're not part of the solution to South Africa's ills. So for people like Paul O'Sullivan to say, geez, Guanazi must fall because we're undermining confidence in the police. It's like, no, we need to, if there's any confidence left in the police, we need to kill it. We need to kill that with fire. And Ramaphosa has already proved his complicity by not doing anything. Andrew Whitfield was fired for going on a trip without permission. The police minister has now lied to Parliament. Like, there's no question about this. Like, whether he's involved in the conspiracy, I mean, that has to be investigated. But that he lied to Parliament is now public record. There's no question about this. He went to Parliament. He said, I don't know him. I think he said that in March. It's now July, and now he said, oh, no. Of course, he's a comrade from way back when. So that is an immediately fireable offense, I would say. Like, immediately you're fired, not suspended. You are fired. You're out of the position, and of course you're implicated in these very serious allegations from the most senior police official in KwaZulu-Natal. So yeah, I mean, Zakes, your video this week looked at the FMF's Section 12 initiative, and David, maybe you want to lead us in on this, but effectively, there are solutions to this crisis. Like, we don't want to give the impression that oh God, South Africa's police service is in shambles, and therefore it's all over for us now. Most violent society in the world, one of the most violent societies in the world. No, there are actually practical solutions to this, and we don't have to be in this situation. David, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, so this is going back in time slightly to last year, in just before the elections. And actually, the Free Market Foundation was one of the few organizations that was trying to put crime back on the electoral agenda. I think everybody was speaking about the May 24 elections as these watershed elections, and they certainly were politically. But it was quite striking that none of the political parties were really talking about what is probably the issue that most South Africans care about the most, next to economic opportunity like jobs. And that's crime. And what's interesting about crime is that it's something that unites all South Africans. I think most South Africans, in one way or another, whether it's directly or indirectly, have experienced criminality. And it's I think most people, proud South Africans, they love living here. They enjoy the people and just the general vibe. But unfortunately, we have a pretty serious crime problem, and I think that colors everything in our daily interactions. And you feel it when you go overseas. Like, my brother lives in South Korea, and when I went to visit him once, I suddenly realized that you walk around in South Africa with this kind of like ambient anxiety about crime, whereas everybody there in Korea, they'll leave their their bags on the train platform and then go to the vending machine to go and get a cool drink, and kind of waltz back 5 minutes later and their bags are still there. And, we've become inured to violence as well. So we don't just have a kind of a petty crime problem. We have a lot of vicious physical assault and death that often accompanies crime. And the other thing is that many people talk about poverty and inequality as being drivers of crime. I'm certainly sure that exacerbates things. But there are many countries that are poorer and perhaps more unequal than South Africa that don't have the same levels of violent criminality. So we at the Free Market Foundation were really keen to elevate this discussion. And I think we also had some novel solutions. So, but before I go into those, I think the other feature of South Africa, which is what I was mentioning earlier, is that we have a lot of criminalization of non-violent, peaceful activity that is essentially trying to control and regulate the economy. We've been looking at some of this tobacco legislation that's been coming down the pipeline, for example. And whilst I don't smoke, and I wouldn't recommend anybody to smoke, there's some pretty draconian measures that are being put in place for the otherwise peaceful activity of pulling on a cigarette, which I don't want to expose Zakhele, but he does that regularly on the balcony of Northwood's house, which is when he gets his best ideas from. So there's some positive externalities from tobacco use. I believe it's very good for your productivity, so I'm told. But anyway, I digress. So, what are some of the other examples, Martin, that we were dealing with in the Section 12? For example, not letting a mine inspector come and inspect your mine. That's actually sanctionable by financial penalties and even prison time. That's just one that occurs to me off the top of my head.
Yeah, recording someone without their permission. Recording someone not without their permission, but without the state's permission means you are engaging in filmmaking. And if you're engaging in filmmaking, you have to be registered as a filmmaker in terms of the Films and Publications Act. And if you engage in filmmaking without being registered, you have committed a crime, and therefore you could go to prison. So that's another example. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and this is this Potemkin village thing, the pretense of authority and control, and the weaker the state becomes, the more it tries to extend its reach. So we were really concerned with that dual problem of runaway violent crime plus this over-criminalization of the economy. And so that was really the underpinning of Section 12. And we had some solutions to that. And one of those was actually decentralization of policing. As we've been kind of discussing in all of the gruesome detail today, we have one national police force. And when that gets captured or under threat in some way, there's some pretty significant concentration risks there, that you have this very high concentration of power there. And if the national executive, a political interest captures that body, then that could be used for very negative purposes. So we were actually on our campaign for Home Rule, which dovetailed quite nicely with this. We were saying that actually capable political entities, but also private and civic organizations, need to start taking over this very important function of crime fighting. It shouldn't be the exclusive preserve of the state, of the national government in particular. And that would actually act as a check and a balance on potential abuses of that power. So not only would it help to deal with the problem itself, I mean, if you consider the Western Cape, everybody, I think, agrees that the Western Cape is South Africa's best run province, and you can see all the numbers in terms of the economy and infrastructure and all of those metrics, but they still have a really significant crime problem. I mean, just ask the communities on the Cape Flats. But the province itself is very inhibited in its ability to deal with this very significant problem. And I think this was a point that you made, Martin, during the Section 12 campaign, was, well, actually you have a duty to your constituents. You might not have the competency in terms of the constitutional divisions of powers, but you have a duty to try and push that envelope. So it's a very nuanced discussion, because you need a kind of a healthy skepticism of national power, but you also have a duty to uphold the law more broadly, in a broad kind of constitutional sense. I mean, you guys are both lawyers, so you'd know better than me, but you don't want to be promoting complete chaos and disregard of the law, but you also need to appeal to a higher moral order, and to say, well, in the absence of significant authority, where communities, for example, in the Cape Flats are being, having a dozen youngsters being killed every weekend, you actually do have a duty to act, and that requires sometimes pushing beyond the scope of your authority. And Martin, you made a point in the paper that we produced. There's this doctrine of necessity. Like, if you're, for example, walking in the parking lot of a shopping center and you decide to smash a window with a brick, then you would rightly be prosecuted for that, because you're violating somebody else's property rights and destroying their property. But the equation changes if it's a very hot day and there's a baby in the back seat and somebody has neglected that baby, and you need to destroy that window in order to rescue the baby from a deadly fate. There you have acted out of necessity, and you've broken a law of smashing somebody's window without their permission, but you did that out of necessity. So I think that's analogous here in this discussion as well. Martin, back to you.
Yeah, if I can just add a little bit onto that before I prompt you, Zakes, because I think, David, you mentioned something that this often comes up, this idea of you can't be a constitutionalist while you're encouraging, for instance, municipalities to just get the thing done, because that would be what is said against the law. And you've now outlined necessity perfectly, and that is this idea that some instances, I mean, the law understands its own limitations, and therefore it provides a coherent way to deal with some of these errors. But there's also another thing that people don't often think about, and this is the equation of rules with order. So what's the ultimate purpose of the law? The law is there to demarcate people's spheres of lawful action to the end of securing public order. What is that? Harmony, so people can live freely with each other in a society. It's about public order. But let's say there is a rule that says you must drive 140 kilometers an hour on the highway. That's the rule. That's the law. You have to drive 140 or you have to get off the highway. And suddenly we have a rainstorm, a massive storm, and everyone is just like, no, there's a rule. We have to drive at 140 on the highway, even though it's a massive storm. I mean, you cannot say that this is order. That is complete and utter chaos. Like, people are going to die. It's chaos because you're adhering to the rule. And that is a very, I would say, kind of potent example of what is actually happening in South Africa today. We have a bunch of rules that people are trying to adhere to, and that is causing disorder, a profound sense of disorder and chaos in the society. And in fact, public order would only be created if some of these rules were to be recontextualized, maybe, and then in some cases, yes, broken. In fact, on the altar of necessity. And one of these, I think, to get back to the topic we're discussing today, would be someone like Mkhwanazi, who probably doesn't have the authority to do what he did. He probably had to go through some PR process to get permission from head office or whatever. But no, he probably saw, my goodness, if I try this, they're gonna silence me. So he broke the rule. But I would say that has served public order. That has now brought sunlight onto something very insidious happening within the police service, and now we can try and fix that problem. Whereas if he just adhered to the rules, that would have allowed people like Kat Matlala and Brown Mkhwanazi to kind of still run roughshod over the interests of ordinary South Africans. So I think people need to be very careful about equating blind adherence to positive law, to the rules that politicians write down, with a broader sense of lawfulness and law-abidingness and this idea of public order. Because if you conflate the two, you end up with very perverse situations. So yeah, I just thought I'd add that. Zakes, you also touched on a lot of these practical solutions to South Africa's crime trouble in your video. You want to
Yeah.
carry on with some of those?
Yeah. I mean, David really touched on it, but like, decentralization is interesting because as I was preparing for the video, I think the day before, right, I was looking at how other places approach policing, and it is pretty much, I would say global consensus outside of like dictatorships that have to centralize policing force, like in places like China or something like that. But in most places of the world, right, they understand the idea of decentralizing as much as you possibly can policing power, right? Like the police departments usually operates autonomously within a certain given what we would call in South Africa municipal jurisdiction, or at the most provincial jurisdiction, right? And in countries that mimic the American way of doing things at the state level, but they operate there if that is the highest level, right? And then the idea of a national police commissioner is more of an executive position that does not have the power to like dictate the distribution of resources or like the application of certain police policy, for lack of a better term. So like what we do have in South Africa is it is weird, it is weird and it does not work. And it shows it, like, as David says, when you centralize power, really, you just give instances for that singular, place. To when it is compromised, the entire system just collapses, and that's what we're seeing right now. To me, that is why it is a bit concerning, right? Is that the highest echelons of this already centralized system are compromised, meaning that the system itself cannot function, right? Like everything that's, for instance, the taking of a police docket from an inferior officer or down in your rank, right? It is legal. Like the police commissioner can do that. The deputy police commissioner can do that. The officer Mkhwanazi can do that to a IO underneath himself, right? So I'm like, these things, this is what is really concerning. Why Section 12 was so great, right? Because we are one of the few organizations that really sought to look at it at a technical level. Why I enjoyed it so much, because I love looking at legal problems at that level, right? Then it shows me beyond the personalities themselves, as I mentioned in my video earlier on in the week, is that like, we once we move away from Mkhwanazi, I don't want us to be fixated on the person of Mkhwanazi or the person of Senzo Mkhunu. It could be anyone, really. Our main solution should be trying to make sure that this does not even have a possibility of happening ever again. And that is why the Section 12 initiative was so great, because it is all inclusive, but I focus mostly on decentralization, right? But like, as you mentioned, it is all connected, because, the definition of crimes, of what we consider crime, feeds into the resources that then will be able to be given to the so-called hypothetically decentralized police forces, because now they will focus on the things that actually harm people instead of the things that don't, or at least if you would want to argue, they don't harm them as much as, they don't harm them immediately, as something like violence would, or, damage to property or things like that, right? So like, yeah, the solutions are there. I want, as I said, the solution to this current problem, right? That's, even though we did not focus on it that much, would be, the amendment of how the policing legislation itself really is structured, right? We need to change how really the distribution of force is structured. We need to change, even maybe, do we even need an executive position like, a police commissioner or ministry of the police? Maybe we can find ways under which police who are decentralized can be accountable to their legislatures. We have provincial legislatures. So, that is something that can exist there, whereby instead of being accountable to an executive, and that's be connected to politicians really, because the executive is staffed with them. Rather, maybe be connected to another form of politician in the legislature. Then at least that form of politician will try and hold you accountable. If it is closer at the provincial level, hopefully the councillors that sit at that provincial legislature. I am trying to, I'm an anarchist, man. I'm like, arm yourself. And that would be really the best way. Arm yourself and get some pretty good private security. We have a pretty great private security in South Africa, I should mention. So, that is the ultimate solution. But within the confines of the state, then there are a lot of things that can be done. For me, it is exciting at a legal level, right? I love thinking creatively about how law can be made. And you mentioning things like how, the following of rules does not necessarily create order is great, because, I'm a huge fan of Bruno Leone, as you know, and I'm like, all legislation just horrible. So this is great stuff, and I think that is what we are suffering from in South Africa, at least at the level of decision makers, like in provinces like the Western Cape, right, where you have people who have this formal respect of formal law, right? Like it is, if it is law, you should follow it. And I'm like, man, I think you are losing, the whole reason behind law, which is if, as you said, if the law says go at 140 in a rainstorm and you follow that, then you are kind of dumb and you don't get why the law existed. So let's not be dumb, people. Let's try, at least for the betterment of, of our constituents. It is horrible in some places of South Africa. The violence that is experienced there, it is something that is unfathomable. And I come from a relatively violent area too, but every time I see stories about the Cape Flats, I'm like, man, I would not touch it with a 10-foot pole, even if someone paid me a whole lot of money, right? But it is saddening too, because those people there definitely want to be living in peace. And as the stories keep on mentioning, they even want things like the army, which I don't think is the greatest of ideas. The South African army does not have a great track record. When it is deployed domestically, it will kill you. So so yeah, there are solutions. My most favorite one is decentralization. I do genuinely think, as I mentioned in my video, that like if we give the people in positions of power, especially in the administration of justice, right, people like police, commanders, and things like that, giving more autonomy to policing and not having it tied down to a lot of political influence will help, and also bringing it closer to the communities themselves, right? If you as a community member know that you can go to your station commander or whomever it is, maybe immediately above them, heck, even if it is your counselor really, and try and know, if you tell them something, there is a viable opportunity that you'll see it as police policy in your area. I think that is better than no waiting for, I don't know, 4 years from now or something. So yeah, pardon me, guys.
No worries. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's key. So I mean, the one thing that Jakes mentioned a bit earlier that I think we just have to hone in on a little bit, that was kind of so I would say the decriminalization aspect of the project of Section 12 was certainly the one I was most passionate about. But potentially the most interesting and practical one is this idea of communities stepping into the breach, because you can, like, as we sit here today, that is something that you can in fact do. You can, as a community, you can form a private security company, or security expert Gideon Yubar is very passionate about a community safety organization, CSOs, which is kind of a comprehensive kind of security company slash neighborhood watch slash kind of almost like an intelligence unit. But you can do that. You can do that right now. The government is trying to make it more difficult, but if you can't register a security company, you can form a neighborhood watch. And a lot of people, and again, this is maybe a problem in Western thinking. That's again one of these post French Revolution errors. This idea of everything, if it's not formally a intelligence law enforcement unit, then then somehow it's not really gonna be up to the task. The reality is you can form a so-called neighborhood watch that in substance is basically a police force. Like you can do that. You can do that right now. You can get together with your community. You can fund it, or it could be not for profit, and you can do that. Many private security companies have intelligence divisions. They have detectives that work at security companies. AfriForum has a massive network of neighborhood watches all across the country that they coordinate. They have an intelligence capability. They investigate things. And as Jake said, AfriForum also has the private prosecutions unit. Now, it's a problem that basically just AfriForum is doing that. I mean, they don't have they have more resources than many other organizations, but they do not have the resources to deal with every single massive crime problem in the country. So this is something that can be done by ordinary organized communities, organized institutions. And really it should be done. If we had a, let's say, a healthy private criminal justice ecosystem, someone like Commissioner Mkhwanazi could hand over the evidence. If he saw that the NPA was captured, he could hand over that evidence to a capacitated private institution to take on a private prosecution of the suspects. That is something that can happen. And well, I mean, in the future, you could see the government repealing the right to privately prosecute. That's very conceivable that could happen. But there's still a hell of a lot, regardless of what the state does, that ordinary people can in fact do to secure themselves against crime. We are not helpless, and if we see ourselves as helpless, then we will be helpless. But there are practical things to do, and we as the Free Market Foundation really encourage that, because the police are not coming. They are not coming to save you. That's a sad reality. I was on the Big Daddy Liberty show 2 weeks ago now. We discussed a lot of the construction mafia, so-called construction mafia issues on that show, and I still get the sense that people have this fantasy that we're just going to take care of the corrupt, and then we're going to get the right people in the police force, and then the problem will disappear. I'm sorry, but no. We have on average 86 reported murders every single day in this country. We have, give or take, 5 reported rapes every single hour, and a minority of rapes are reported. Let's be clear about that. You could have the best police service on the planet. You're not going to solve that problem with a single institution, with a single prosecuting authority, with a single national police service. Decentralization is not just preferable as a safety valve to ensure that corruption isn't concentrated and that we avoid concentration risk, but it is simply necessary. You cannot get away from it when you have a society like ours, which is always said to be one of the friendliest societies in the world, which is awesome. But when push comes to shove, is also the one of the most murderous societies on the planet. So you just have to think about ways that you yourself and your community and your family can get your hands really dirty solving this problem. David.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about movies earlier, and if you think of the classic like cop dramas, you'll often have the kind of the local police doing their best in a maverick way to like solve some of these complex problems on the ground, and then the feds come in and they want to override them, and then there's a big debate like, you're beyond your jurisdiction. It's like, this is murder, this is my jurisdiction. And it's like, hand in your badge. No, so we need more of that. Actually, we need more government entities fighting with each other. So maybe that is the silver lining. I mean, it's kind of a bit disquieting when you see below the hood all the rotten mess that's been exposed this week. But I think maybe it's healthy and necessary for us to kind of see that, and also to trigger a bit of a conflict over this, because the status quo just really is out of control. mean, I think what's interesting with Mkhwanazi is that I think there's been an outpouring of popular support for him. And I think there is, and given our political leanings, we should be a bit wary of this as well. That there's this outpouring of support because people are yearning for a kind of a strongman character to come in and sort out the mess. And here's this young, brave officer who's trying to do what's right. And the temptation is to sacrifice civil liberties. Like, I mean, I think Bukele in El Salvador, right, has done this and has dramatically turned around the crime situation. That was one of the most violent societies on earth. And he often very glibly says, well, people talk about human rights, but where's your human rights when a woman gets killed on her way to the shops by some crossfire of a gang warfare? I mean, there is a very important point there. But with that great power comes also a great risk that significant force might be used for nefarious ends. And also that, when you call for that kind of exercise of power, that could be turned against you at some point. So I think our message is perhaps a bit more nuanced and a bit more of a balanced one, because you do need to have constraints on power. And that's often quite a difficult sell when people are seeing society unraveling in violent conflict around you. But we've seen throughout history many cautionary tales of this desire for a strongman to come in, and very quickly that concentration of violent coercive power gets used to quash opponents. People look with admiration at Rwanda under Paul Kagame. But what happens when you stand up against Paul Kagame? You end up dead in a hotel room somewhere in Sandton. And then it's very difficult to dislodge those people when things go awry. So, yeah, I think constitutionalism, rules-based order is what you should be striving for, rather than some kind of savior to come in. And since we're talking about movies, I was thinking of The Dark Knight and Harvey Dent, the brave white knight that tries to rescue the sordid city of Gotham. I think Gotham has some competition from Joburg these days. But, he also becomes corrupted and ends up turning into Two-Face, right? And Two-Face, I think, is an amazing metaphor for this fight against crime. Maybe there's a reason why some of these crime fighters end up going over to the dark side, because as Solzhenitsyn reminded us, the division between good and evil, there is a line that runs through the heart of every man. And so, the temptation is that you could succumb to those dark forces, right? So Batman might just be like a kind of a superhero movie, but there's a kind of a strong morality in that, right? So I think, we want to make sure that, we strive for a rules-based order rather than trying to have a white knight to come and save us.
Yeah, I would want to add on that, because the key thing here, and I think these things go hand in hand, is every dictator and every strongman has the intention of doing what Bukele did. Like, Lenin wanted to deal with crime and Hitler wanted to deal with crime, but we only remember those who did it with hindsight in a good way, with praise. So we as libertarians, we think about Augusto Pinochet in Chile, and we think, well, he actually did a great job there. I mean, sure, there's some excesses to what he did, but ultimately we think that Chile is better than what it was under Allende. I think a lot of people are going to think back to, Bukele did it right. Rwanda in Africa, sure, he's doing it more right than he's doing it wrong. Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore, he's what a great time. But you can count these examples. The fact that I could just run over them like this is a problem. Like, I should have been thinking, wow, there's so many great examples of these dictatorships that kind of just ended up being more liberal than they were illiberal. But no, that's simply not how it works out. And we all think about, it's Bukele in El Salvador, because all the other examples are trash. So that is why the liberal kind of approach is, maybe it's a little bit more boring, but it's the safer approach. It's the more sensible approach. Is you have to assume that your dictator is not going to turn out like the few examples that you have in the back of your mind of good dictators. Benevolent dictatorship isn't something you order at a restaurant and then you get what you ordered. No, no. You usually order benevolent dictatorship and get poison. So you have to avoid that if you can, and appreciate the benevolent dictatorships of the past for having coincidentally turned out well. And your example about superheroes is great, and I know there's a big is that what's his name, James Gunn's new Superman just dropped, and people are saying, yes, it's a return to form, the hopeful superhero. And I understand that there's a big, in the superhero community, yearning back for this. We want our superheroes to be these perfect human beings who kind of always just fight crime and kind of do the right thing. But I think stories like The Boys, like Invincible, also superhero franchises, they teach us important lessons, and that is that, and specifically in the case of The Boys, and I recommend anyone to watch that, is that your superheroes are going to be subject to the same incentives, the same bad incentives that ordinary people are subject to. And if you give them absolute power, you are going to come second in that equation. You are not going to have Clark Kent and Superman. You will be the exception. You will be the exception of your Superman. You will find Homelanders and Omni-Men far more in practice, and that's the story of the liberal constitutional experiment that started uh, um, several centuries ago, is the idea that, and I think Hayek, I can't recall the exact quote, but it's in his essay, Individualism, True and False. It's something along the lines of liberalism is the creation of a system in which bad men can do the least harm. Yes, that also means that good men cannot change the world for the better in one fell swoop, but it does mean that bad actors can do the least amount of harm. That's only on the back of limited government, decentralization, and a keeping the state out of those intimate affairs, the types of things that we would want to decriminalize. But we are running towards the end of our show now. I'm going to give you guys a chance for a final word. I'll start with you, Zakes. And then when David is done after you, I will wrap up.
Cool. Man, it's been great. Firstly, David mentioned like a proper Batman, like, proper Batman analysis. He even knew the real name. Batman's one of my favorite heroes in DC. Not as great as, Hal Jordan and John Stewart and the Green Lanterns, but he's also pretty cool. So it was a nice turn right there, right? With the proper reference to the duality of fighting crime and being Batman has the best rogues gallery. To Martin's point, I don't like Superman, and this is going to be a superhero discussion, really. But I don't like Superman because I call him the Boy Scout, right? I don't think that, like, when Jerry Siegel created him, a great writer, did not give him enough depth. But I get why he's necessary as a contrast to Batman. Batman is like more depth given, and then Superman is like a Boy Scout in the idealistic sense, which is important too in the ideal. I always call him like the ideal of law in the sense that we all have, right? A perfect age, do not harm anyone, and then the reality of it all in the practicalities of it would be Batman. But yeah, that is pretty cool. Also, I just love the Harvey Dent reference because it captured perfectly what Two-Face is, and the reason he was the way that he was. But yeah, on our point, on criminal justice, we need to limit the instances of concentration of power. To me, that is the most important. So that's when a Two-Face does appear, when someone is captured and goes over to the dark side, we have other avenues of escape, for lack of a better term, other avenues that will still be functional. And to your point, Martin, things like community organizations, that as an anarchist to me is great. That I think should be the focus, right? Wherever we are, to try and organize ourselves as communities, starting with yourself, as I said, arm yourself first, and then we congregate with other people who are like-minded, who want to protect life, liberty, and property, and the state will find you there doing it. If they do actually come, if they do get their together. So yeah, that to me is really, I think General Mkhwanazi did a great thing by revealing that, because hopefully it encourages the agorist impulses in every single one of us in wanting to actually take control of the reins and not look for the white knights, because in most cases they're not. The white knights can be captured too, and they become two-faced. So yeah.
Well, Martin, I haven't watched The Boys, but I've seen some clips. It looks pretty horrendous, especially when those human emotions come into play. And when you give human beings extraordinary power, then even if you're a superhero, you can get a bit out of hand. But actually, my favorite is Watchmen, which is also kind of the original kind of anti-hero. And if you think of characters like Dr. Manhattan, he's this omnipotent super weapon. But yeah, I think at some point the journalists accuse him of spreading his kind of radioactive touch everywhere, and so he has like a crisis of confidence, and he exiles himself to Mars, where he goes and kind of contemplates what is his real role. So anyway, but we're digressing. I think I think this is an important conversation that South Africa needs to be having around, like, what is the state of the state and its criminal justice system, because we have myriad problems in the country. But if we don't sort this out, then we're going to have some pretty serious crises on our hands in terms of the basic freedoms that we all enjoy and take for granted. And so I think we should be really getting animated about this, but at the same time looking a bit further than the soap opera drama that we've seen unfold this week, and be thinking about, why is our economy so overly criminalized? How can we decentralize crime fighting in this country to kind of spread some of these risks and diffuse some of the political nature of the problem that we're facing? And how do we develop the crime fighting capacity in this country? We divert a lot of resources into kind of boondoggles and pork barrel bullshit, really. But we're not kind of paying attention to the kind of core problem here. So yeah, that's my closing remarks. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks. I couldn't say it any better myself. Our attention isn't where it needs to be when it comes to crime, but specifically violent crime. We still see ourselves fundamentally, or for some reason, we see ourselves fundamentally as effectively a normal kind of, let's say, Western European country, and everything is basically okay. We just have to kind of give more funding to that unit and do this for that unit and kind of appoint slightly better detectives, and everything will be okay. I mean, that is such a deeply problematic worldview that I think dominates in our society. This kind of marginal betterment is kind of where our salvation lies. No, we need really fundamental intervention in the basic logic of criminal justice in this country, and that's what the Free Market Foundation really proposes with its Section 12 initiative. And we encourage everyone to maybe just peruse some of those ideas at section12.org.za. But yeah, that is it for this week's episode of the Rational Standard. I want to thank you guys for joining in this very interesting conversation. And also, of course, to everyone who joined us live. I see we had a respectable crowd of about 30 people watching us live. So thank you to all of you, and for the engagement in the comments. I really appreciate it. And to everyone who will be watching this a little bit later as well. We hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, please do like and share. Visit rationalstandard.com and restack our content there and like it as well. And please subscribe to the YouTube channel specifically, and click the bell icon to be notified of when our new content drops on a weekly basis. Yeah, but I think that is it. Everyone, have a good weekend. Cheerio.